Om Deshmukh says North Korea recently has sent 12,000 soldiers to Russia to fight against Ukraine. Do you think it would accelerate the war to NATO nations to send their soldiers also? Well, the West can use this as the pretext and the justification for allowing soldiers of other nationalities to fight the war against Russia in Ukraine. Yes, it can certainly happen. Why did Russia have to do this? I'm not really sure why they allowed North Korean soldiers to fight in the war. Probably the conflict is now expanding in its scope very slowly. This is the defining conflict of the first half of this century. It is the conflict that has ripped open the fissures that kind of existed and were papered over between East and West. And now we are seeing the battle lines or the sides, the confrontational sides being drawn very clearly. On the one hand, you have the US and its entire menagerie of vassals, the EU, NATO, various African nations. It neo-colonizes the AUKUS grouping, the various nations it occupies, like Japan, South Korea, etc. This entire grouping of nations is the West, let's say. So it's not a geographical entity, it's a geopolitical entity. It includes nations like South Korea and Japan, which are under US occupation since 1945 or since the 1950s in South Korea's case. So all of that is the West. That's one side. The other side is the East, which is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, um, Lebanon, perhaps, Yemen to some extent, and certain African nations and so on. And for us, India, we are kind of in between. We're neither here or nor there, or we are kind of the bridge between East and West. And we are staying neutral as long as we can. That's the situation. So, with this as the context, maybe Russia wanted to get North Korea involved in this. North Korea, as we know, is managed by China. It is a Chinese proxy, Chinese vassal. So it probably was done at China's behest. This sending of 12,000 or whatever number of soldiers in Ukraine, it will give them exposure to an active conflict. Uh, it always helps a military force, an armed force, to be uh, involved in war fighting on a reasonably regular basis, because otherwise you're just doing war gaming and tactics and strategy on the whiteboard or whatever, and you're not actually exposed to warfare. You're not being shot at, fired at, and you're kind of rusty. So 12,000 soldiers from North Korea go and fight for a certain amount of time in Ukraine. They're going to gain a wealth of experience, tactics, strategy, battlefield, how the battlefield scenario is, and so on. And they can come back and you know propagate their learnings throughout the North Korean military. So maybe that's the reason why it was done. But yes, it can certainly serve as the justification for NATO to send soldiers of various other nations to fight the Russians in Ukraine in case any nation volunteers to send soldiers. So yeah, it could lead to a broadening of the conflict.